But when I really became a Christian, it was like turning the corner on a cornfield and you see the rows line up. It's the same corn from one point of view, but another, you see the nice, neat rows. History from a secular perspective, it's all there, but it makes no sense. You see it from God's perspective. It's like God has a plan. Freedom spreads so that people can be all that God made them to be, and they can be a blessing. And our relationship with God is not forced, it's voluntary. And you can actually love God back instead of being afraid of the government, right? And saying something even though you don't believe it.
You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowlin.
And I'm Sean Graham.
We lead Conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful you're joining us today. Conservative Christians of Tennessee, of course, exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate. Send us any questions or comments. You can reach me directly by emailing Matthew at tnchristian.com.
Or Sean, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com.
Today's show is brought to you in the Memphis area by Herbie Systems. Give Herbie Systems a call at 901-451-8214 for all your lawn care needs. Since 1984, Herbie Systems has been the premier lawn care and landscape company in the Mid-South. So give Herbie Systems a call today. Again, that phone number is 901-451-8214, or visit herbiesystems.com and let them kill your weeds. Our scripture for today is from Joshua, the 4th chapter, verses 4 through 7. Then Joshua called the 12 men whom he had appointed from the children of Israel, one man from every tribe. And Joshua said to them, cross over before the ark of the Lord your God into the midst of the Jordan, and each one of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the children of Israel. This may be a sign among you when your children ask in time to come, saying, what do these stones mean to you? Then you shall answer them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord when it crossed over the Jordan. The waters of the Jordan were cut off, and these stones shall be for a memorial to the children of Israel. Listeners, we did it. We're recording this on election night, but we're through another presidential election. No more text messages, no more mailboxes flooded with campaign slander and drama. So we're really excited to not talk about that today, but we want to focus on something that became undeniable as the election cycle played out. And that's just that we proved in the last election cycle that policy is no longer the focus of American politics. People cast their vote for the guy they thought was Mickey Mouse or others, and they just laughed it off without understanding the importance of each vote. People refused to choose between the candidates, so they stepped out of the process and they let other people make the decision for them. Well-meaning Americans that wanted to see our nation continue to prosper focused on the policy of politics, but they didn't. We saw the opposite. News outlets, celebrity sports stars, all these people came in, and the populace just proudly focused on their personality, and they in turn focused on the personality of the politicians. They just gave lip service to policy and the ability of the candidates. So since the days of Reagan, and even more so with Bill Clinton, we've shifted our elections into a popularity contest, and the measuring stick is just who the coolest guy in the room is. So for 3 or 4 decades now, we've made a presidential candidate selection like on a national scale. It's just centered on fluid stances of people that never studied the word of the Lord or the founding principles that did make America a great nation. And I can't help but think that if we don't address this, if we don't get a handle on it, it could be a fatal flaw. If America overlooks the actual needs of the nation and the needs for proper legislation, we'll not only not be a God-centered nation, we'll become a man-centered nation, and those men will increasingly fail us. Our guest today, William J. Federer, is a nationally known speaker, best-selling author, and president of Amerisearch Incorporated, a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. He graduated with a degree in business from St. Louis University in 1980 and married his wife, Susie, May 2nd of 1981. Bill's American Minute radio feature is broadcast daily on this station and across America. His Faith in History television airs on the TCT network on stations across America and via Direct TV. He's the author of more great articles and books than we could ever begin to list in this show. But we're excited to have him on today to talk about his latest book titled Silence Equals Consent, The Sin of Omission. Speak now or forever lose your freedom. Welcome to Faith in Action, Bill Federer.
Hey, it's great to be with you.
I remember the night that Sean met you because y'all were in Jackson and he was coming back, and he called me and he was like, dude, I just met the coolest guy. We started talking, and then all of a sudden they decided to turn the lights off. Our listeners hear your biblical views and insights on history every day on bot radio stations here and as they travel around the country. But for those that are not familiar with your background and your connection to bot radio, can you tell our listeners the story of your political campaign and how you became friends with the bot family through that campaign?
Right. So I wrote my first book, America's God and Country, Encyclopedia Quotations, came off the press in 1994 and sold 500,000 copies. Focus on the Family sold several 100,000 copies. And that opened the door for me to do more writing and speaking. We moved back to St. Louis out of Texas. We're originally from St. Louis. And I decided to run for Congress against Dick Gebhardt. So he was the Nancy Pelosi before Nancy Pelosi, the number one Democrat congressman in the nation. And it was a big deal. We had Ted Nugent doing commercials, Chuck Norris, Pat Boone, Art Linkletter, Zig Ziglar, Alan Keyes, Judge Moore, Phyllis Schlafly, James Dobson.
Wow.
And during this, Dick Bott called me up and asked me to do interviews. And he was just such a godsend back then because Gebhardt spent $9 million against me. He drained the entire Democrat leaders' victory fund, and he would do all kinds of slander and negative ads. And Dick Bott would call me up and say, Bill, would you like to come on and respond to the latest attack? I called Gebhardt's office and asked if he wanted to get on too, but they didn't return my phone call. So the half hour is yours.
Wow.
And I was able to keep my base together and counter all the attacks. And it was just amazing. And the first time I ran, we gave Gebhardt the lowest reelection margin of his career. The second time I ran, we had the president's uncle, Bucky Bush, co-chair of my finance committee. He was the younger brother of George H.W. Bush. We had the top 3 members of the U.S. Congress come into Missouri and campaign for me against Gebhardt, which I think is a historic event. I don't think that ever happened before or since to have. Back then it was Dennis Hastert, the Speaker of the House, and Dick Armey and J.C. Watts came into Gebhardt's district, the number one Democrat, to campaign against him. We had all kinds of national support. I spoke twice at the House Conference Committee. And so that's where the Republicans meet before they go on the floor. And the Democrats have their meeting place before they go on the floor. And you don't see it because whenever you're watching pictures of Congress on C-SPAN, you just see the floor. But this is sort of like the locker room, so to speak. And so they would have the different congressmen give their talks on important issues. So they'd all sort of be on the same page when they got out on the floor. And so I got to address all the Republican congressmen in America twice during this. And they were all thrilled that I was running a very significant campaign against Gebhardt. But on election night, we get phone calls that my name was accidentally left off the ballot in 5 wards in the city of St. Louis. It's just an accident, but the judge responded by ordering all the polls to stay open till 10 o'clock. And it's like, well, wait a second, they're supposed to close, at 7. How are you going to tell if somebody didn't vote once or twice? And then we had the volunteer at the polling location counting off all the ballots boxes. And she said that they can't find the box of ballots from Guffey Elementary School, which happened to be the biggest precinct voting location in Jefferson County that I personally stood in front of for 8 hours that day, shaking thousands of hands in the cold. And I have a volunteer tell me they lost the box of ballots from that place. And then we were ahead in Jefferson County and the electricity goes off. And when they reboot, we go from ahead to behind. And it was one thing after another. We had a lady visited her mom in a nursing home and found out her mom had voted. And she said, how did she know who to vote for? She doesn't even recognize me anymore. She has Alzheimer's. And they said, oh, they had somebody help her. And it was like when you personally experience spending 2 years of your life going to all these meetings, raising money, and then on election night, having these shenanigans happen. And I could go on all night long going through these, but I won't belabor the point. Anyway, I didn't win, but came close. But Dick Bott introduced me to so many people on a national level that it just changed my life and career numerous times. He would have me fly in his plane to meetings in D.C. One in particular was at the Family Research Council building with Dobson and Gary Bauer and Ralph Reed and all the leaders. And we spent a week, and every single Republican candidate for president came in there and spent 2 hours with us. And we answered questions. And, Mike Huckabee, it was amazing. But he just pulled me into this circle that I'd never been in before. And it just really helped launch my career to having more of a national impact. And of course, airing the American Minutes on the network across the country. And every week I'm traveling and speaking. I run into people that say, "Oh, I listen to your American Minutes, and oh,
Mm-hmm.
those are so great." And I just say, "Well, God bless Dick and Shirley Bott and Rich and Faye Bott, because they're the ones that have been so generous to open these doors for me, and I'm eternally grateful to them."
Yeah. And that's so encouraging to hear people talk about American history that identify with America, that love the Lord, and want to see that love of America, the love of the Lord, and the love of history unite in a way that just feel good. But it sets a trajectory, if people will listen to it,
Mm-hmm.
that offers a lot of hope and promise. So thank you for doing that. And, Sean and I just do this once a week. Consistent radio production takes a lot of effort. So thank you for doing this all these years.
Well, it's a labor of love. I do feel an urgency. One of the books that I put together, the Silence Equals Consent, and I give a zoomed out picture of world history. And from the beginning of the invention of writing, Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley, today that's Iraq. And that's where, Nimrod's Tower of Babel. And from the beginning of humans keeping records around, 4,000 BC, and we're 2080, so that's around 6,000 years. The most common form of government's a king, and a king is a glorified gang leader, and it's a hierarchical system. If you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. You're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger, because with the latest military advancement, kings can kill more people. Instead of Cain killing Abel with a rock, they can kill with a bronze weapon, an iron weapon, a phalanx spear, big long ones that the Alexander the Great's men had, a scimitar sword that the Muslims had, gunpowder the Chinese invented, a composite bow that the Mongols had. The weapon keeps improving, but it's that same fallen nature of Cain killing Abel. Anybody that can plot on a graph sees that at some point it's going to max out on a global level. And Jesus said, "Wheat and tares grow together till the harvest." But at the time of America's founding, the most powerful king was the King of England. The sun never set on the British Empire. He had India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica. The King of England was a globalist. He was a one world government guy. And America's founders didn't like one world government guys. And so they broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. And so the word citizen is from the Greek. It means co-ruler, co-sovereign, co-king. So we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves.
That's
and
right.
This is a total anomaly in world history that we don't appreciate until we zoom out and look at it. And then the question has to be asked, where did our founders get this idea? From the New England pastors who got their idea from the Bible, the Reformation, but what part of the Bible? The first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul. So lo and behold, we talked to kings. Well, the first nation with millions of people and no king was ancient Israel. They come out of Egypt where there's a Pharaoh. They come into the promised land where there's King Og of Bashan and so forth. And for 400 years, Israel did not have a king. And it was a system called the Hebrew Republic, where every citizen is taught the law and personally accountable to God to follow the law. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, you can get away with it, and then you think, God's watching me. He wants me to be fair. He's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates a tiny thing in your head called the conscience. If everybody believes this, you can maintain order with no king, with no police. And it worked until the priest went woke. You say, what? Yeah. Eli, the high priest, his own sons are sleeping with women in the tent where the Ark of the Covenant is. Another Levite with a concubine, another Levite with a silver graven image. It's like you had pastors saying, oh, there's no sin anymore. God loves you. Do whatever you want. Could you imagine that? Anyway, it turns into chaos, and they rape the poor concubine to death, and they all go to Samuel the prophet, and they say, the self-government system's not working. We want to be like all the other countries. We want a king. Samuel cries, and the Lord tells Samuel, they did not reject you. They rejected me. So they get King Saul, and he's pouting that his son Jonathan became friends with David, turns to his soldiers and says, none of you soldiers care about me. And one soldier, Doeg the Edomite, says, King, I care. I saw David go to this town, and the priest there gave him some bread and the sword of Goliath that was stored there. Saul said, that's all I need to hear. Tell the priest to show up. Well, the priests come, and Saul turns to his soldiers and says, kill them. And the soldiers hesitate. And Doeg the Edomite goes out there and kills them all, about 70 of them. What just happened? The soldiers were still operating under the old system where each individual is accountable to God to follow the law. And the law says you need 2 or more witnesses before you condemn somebody to death. And there's only one witness, Doeg. They still have a conscience. They're hesitating. They fear God more than the government. And Doeg says, King, I'm going to surrender my conscience to the government. You tell me to kill, I'll kill. Tell me to kill the baby in the womb, I'll kill it. Tell me there's no more male and female. Tell me kids can be furries. I'm just a bunch of mush. You blow your trumpet, I'll bow to your statue.
Yeah.
So why is this story important? The kings of Europe look to Saul as the example. They look to the King Saul and on, the divine right of kings. I'm the royal appointed gang leader. And do believe what I tell you to, or I'm going to cancel you and stick you in a J6 jail and burn you at the stake. Where the founders of America look to the pre-King Saul part of the Bible.
Right.
Millions of people, everybody taught the law. That's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. And we could maintain order with no king, a bottom-up form of government versus top-down. So why is this important? Romans 13, let everyone be subject to the governing authority, for there's no authority except that which God has established. It's like, okay, in a monarchy, subjects submit to the king. But in a republic, the citizens are the king. The politicians are your servants. You tell them what to do, right? They're public servants. You hire them, you fire them. And so it's a polarity change. Instead of top down, ruled by kings who claim to be divinely appointed, it's bottom up, ruled by we the people, and everybody's taught the law and accountable to God to follow it. America is an experiment in self-government, and they got their idea from the New England pastors, from the Bible, what part? The first 400 years out of Egypt before King Saul.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I think a lot about the quote that John Adams said that's been getting a lot of playtime recently, that America was only made for a good and moral people. The form of government was fit for no other. And I think a lot of people assume, well, that's because people break the law now. And there's positive law and negative law, but we've deviated so far in the concept of the liability of the bystander, or the concept of the obligation of the bystander to render, that is so far removed from us. And as you were telling the story of Saul having the priests killed, and you mentioned those soldiers that paused, and I'm sitting here, I'm thinking, well, had those soldiers never read Deuteronomy 22, which it talks about your obligation if you see your neighbor's ox go in a ditch. That's where the concept of the rendering of aid to the bystander comes from. We don't love our neighbor. We don't feel any obligation to them, and it's so easy for us to just ignore the political situation because of that.
Yeah, and one of the other things I point out, of course, the title of my book is Silence Equals Consent. But the verse everyone has memorized is Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
Do you know the verse immediately before it? Confront your neighbor directly, so you will not incur their guilt upon you. So they're loving each other and they're confronting each other. Why? Because there's no police, there's no king for 400 years. Everybody's taught the law. Everybody helps enforce the law. It's sort of like being a parent. You love your kid, you want to hug your kid, but every now and then you have to correct your kid. Ancient Israel, they're loving each other, but every now and then you got to correct your neighbor. Why is this important? Because the left says, oh, if your child wants to transition, just love them, just accept them. You love your kid and you correct your kid. If you left your kid up to their feelings, they would eat candy all day long and their teeth would rot out of their head, right? The idea is that we need to take responsibility with this idea that, oh, we're not going to get involved in politics. Our church is so spiritual. We just preach the gospel. We don't care what kind of country we're leaving our kids. It's like, in a wedding ceremony, there's a verse in Numbers 30 where it says, if a daughter is still living in her father's house, bind yourself with a vow. And the day the father hears her, if he's silent, her vows stand. But if he disallows it, she's released from the vow. That's come down to us as vows in a wedding ceremony. And the pastor tells the church members, if you're silent when you hear these wedding vows, you're giving your consent. It's called the rule of tacit admission. It's in real estate law. You have a rent house and a squatter moves in. If you're silent, they can gain title to your rent house. It's in debt collection law. Somebody owes you money and you're not trying to collect. The judge will say you're past the statute of limitation, no money. And so if you're silent, gives consent to weddings, it gives consent to other things. And if they're killing babies in the community and the church members are silent, not wanting to get involved, they're giving their consent to killing babies. If they're teaching the trans agenda, and Jesus said in the beginning, God made a male and female, and you're silent, you are giving consent to the teaching of something other than what Jesus would teach. And Jesus said, if you allow one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, better that a millstone be put around your neck and be thrown in the depths of the sea. So it's going to be a rude awakening for all those church members who think they're holy by not getting involved in politics. When they realize by their silence, they're giving consent to all that evil. They're inviting the judgment of God on their heads.
Man,
There's
I
no
love
neutrality.
talking to you, Bill. You're a wealth of information. I've got to ask you, I don't see Dr. PhD. I don't see any of these letters that all these other people who like to trot out their information. You're a working man by history. You actually come from the real estate and business world. You come from common people and everyday knowledge. This is actually more in the historical tradition of America anyway, to be a learned man of many subjects. I appreciate what you're doing because you've been recognized over the years as a theological man of excellence. I cannot praise you enough, and other people have done it too. There's pages of people who have poured accolades and honorary degrees on you, and I appreciate what you're doing and the level at which you're delivering it. The degrees haven't stopped you. There wasn't an MDiv or some sort of seminary requirement that held you back from doing it. You jumped in and got it. This is like the American founders. You jumped in, learned how to do it, and now you are an American expert. What got you into that? And do you see institutions?
Where did you get permission? We have to have permission for these things.
That's right. Is anybody else given permission to be another Bill Federer?
Yeah, everybody has permission. My dad was an attorney and the head of several historical societies, the Chatillon de Menil Mansion in St. Louis and the Carondelet Historical Society. And so every vacation, we'd always have a couple of days going to Spanish Fort, French Fort, Kit Carson, this, P Ridge Battlefield, that.
Wow.
So I knew about history, but it wasn't until I really became a believer as an adult. I mean, I was raised in church, but it wasn't real to me. But when I really became a Christian, it was like turning the corner on a cornfield and you see the rows line up. It's the same corn from one point of view, but another, you see the nice, neat rows. Mm-hmm. History from a secular perspective, it's all there, but it makes no sense. You see it from God's perspective. It's like God has a plan, freedom spread, so that people can be all that God made them to be, and they can be a blessing. And our relationship with God is not forced, it's voluntary, and you can actually love God back instead of being afraid of the government, right? And saying something even though you don't believe it. So that's where I got the love of history. I did have a couple different colleges give me honorary doctorates, which...
You're humble about it, but it's a lot of people have recognized you for your academic effort. And I appreciate you've signed religious statements. You've been respected over the years. And with the people that we look to and hold to respect, I want to say thank you for holding up these traditions. You've been an excellent, excellent testimony, and I appreciate it.
Well, I am on the board of Regent University in Virginia Beach, and it is an excellent, excellent university. Michelle Bachman's the head of our School of Government, and Jay Sekulow is on our board, and I do want to put a plug in for that. And then I do stuff with Turning Point Academy, Charlie Kirk. So I produce a weekly video where the student asks a question, and then I give a short answer, and then we put graphics with it. And it's quite interesting and entertaining, but they can sign up for that at Turning Point Academy. Anyway, I just been beating my drum and hoping to wake up people.
I'm connecting some dots here. Charlie Kirk has been giving some fantastic answers lately that he wouldn't have given 4 or 5 years ago about the origins of American government and the connection between, American government and Scripture, some of the early founders. Do you have at least a small part to play of that? Have you been passing some books Mr. Kirk's way?
Yeah, Charlie's a great friend. I text him usually once a week, and I've been a guest on his program probably a dozen times. I've spoken at his events, at least a dozen times over the years. And I first heard him when he was 18. He just got out of high school, and I was speaking in Southern Illinois, and they had this young guy speaking right before me, and I usually go over my notes, and he was like so captivating. I couldn't concentrate on my notes, so I just listened. And he talked about how some wealthy person said, take a year off before you go to college, and I'll pay for you to go around and give talks. Well, that turned into not going to college at all, and now he has this national organization. He's brilliant. He motivates people. And he's serious about his faith.
He is.
And I'm very, very proud of him. I just can't say enough good things. But he's helping to equip and motivate other people to be all that they can be. We do have a great country. And you know what? And again, you zoom out and look at all world history. If we got rid of America, it would be a gang war on a global scale between the Chinese gang leaders, the Russian gang leaders, the Iranian gang leaders, the North Korean gang leaders, and human rights and values will be crushed. So we realize that this is a unique opportunity we have. And Ronald Reagan said, if we let this go, it'll be 1,000 years before we can have another chance at freedom. Of course, I think that the Lord will come back before then. Yeah. But he says, we'll spend our sunset years telling our children what it once was like in America when men were free. Let's all be involved. Let's be like the Braveheart, where he, says, yeah, you can go home, the Mel Gibson character in Braveheart, but you'll be you're fired, and you'll give anything to be back here on this battlefield and be willing to fight for freedom. And so I encourage people. I said, this is worth fighting for, to save our country for the sake of our kids. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children.
Yes. Your book, Silence Equals Consent, it's worth reading. Tell our listeners where they can get a copy of it, please.
Thank you so much. My website's AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. I send out history email you can sign up for, and it was some story in history that has some application to what's going on today, and I usually highlight faith in there. So AmericanMinute.com.
And you folks can also make a donation to the American Minute at AmericanMinute.com. So, folks, we encourage you to buy the book and to donate as you feel led. Sean, I think that's going to do it for another episode. Are we out of time?
We go so fast when it's such a great conversation with somebody we appreciate like you. Thank you for coming on.
Yes.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you, folks. And we're thrilled to talk with you each week in Nashville, Memphis, Clarksville, all over Tennessee as we talk about more ways to put your faith into action. If you want to hear more on this or other topics from a Christian worldview, head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. We have links to 5 years of past shows there, and you can listen to a wide range of guests sharing their wisdom about current events that affect Tennessee and the entire nation. And until next week, remember our favorite promise from the book of Exodus: the Lord shall reign forever and ever.